What is good, everybody? Thank you so much for joining us on another episode of the Coffee Roaster Warm Sessions podcast. This is, I think, episode 154, if I'm not mistaken. At the beginning of every single episode, we just pour some good old batch brews, some drip coffee, literally made from a classic drip coffee.
Still on
Maker.
the Breville, huh?
That's right, the Breville Precision Brewer.
Is that ever going to change?
Hopefully with fellows Aiden. Need to follow up with Alex, see if he can get one moving our way, and have him on the podcast too.
Have you seen any reviews and any comments on the Aiden? I haven't watched any videos.
I don't think it's even out yet. Yeah,
makes sense.
Or very little and limited quantity. So
yeah.
I think they ship in September or something. But it's kind of crazy, kind of impressive how much like a drip coffee maker for home use can get so much buzz and attention. But also, I guess, like the Studio X Bloom or the
Do you remember when I told you about the Aiden last November?
Was it all the way back in November?
It wasn't released yet. You know how I knew? Was because Maddie works in patents. And we pulled up the patent. I always check on fellows' patent stuff because it's something in the pipeline. It's like, oh, there's a patent for a batch brewer.
Oh, nice.
For a spray head.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah. High hopes, but we've talked about that already on the podcast. What do you think of the batch?
I think it's pretty good. It's pretty tasty. It's pretty good. What coffee is this? It tastes kind of like either it's the Colombia, the Bourbon, kind of tastes a little bit like that, or it kind of tastes like Jorge Mendes, to be honest.
I think it tastes a little better than Jorge, but this is a coffee from Heart Coffee Roasters.
Oh, really?
This is a Colombia, I believe. I'll be back one sec.
The only reason I would say it doesn't fully, I didn't think it tastes like Jorge, is because it has just slight like Bourbon like acidity, and I know that Jorge Mendes's the El Panal has a little bit of Bourbon in it.
Yeah.
So
it's a variety actually I've never seen before. It's a Bourbon Arusi. Never heard of it.
Yeah.
But yeah, this is from Heart Coffee Roasters down in Portland. Notes of cloudberry, whatever that is, apricot, and panela.
Well, yeah, that makes sense. Apricot and panela is a lot of the flavor notes that we've in the past had on Jorge too. If I'm thinking about the same.
Yeah. It's nice, just a fully washed Colombia. Pretty solid.
Is it Panel? How do you spell it?
Panela.
L-A. Yeah, that's what I was thinking, because it's like a brown sugar kind of sweetness to it. Like
it's a pastry, no?
It's a whole cane sugar. Look, I'm like, it's a whole cane sugar. It's unrefined and typical of Latin America. It's solid form of sucrose that comes from just boiling and evaporating sugar cane juice.
Oh, interesting.
Panela is a brown in color and has a strong caramel flavor, which is what we've had on the Panal, and we've had
true.
We've had apricot on the Panal too before. Yeah, and that's why it reminded me a lot. The only thing that threw me off was because the acidity was juicier than the Panal. The Panal is kind of rich and thick and syrupy to a certain degree, of course. With like, if you envision, because we didn't put panela on there, we put caramel. If you envision that in mind, then you're like, oh, okay, that's why it kind of tastes like Jorge.
Really solid. Nothing negative, but it's also, I wouldn't say it's like anything wild out of the ordinary.
Honduras, who's the producer?
No, it's Colombia. So
I don't know why I thought Honduras, but Colombia. Who's the producer?
Javier Quintero.
Okay.
Yeah. It kind of sounds familiar, but they have like pretty much an all washed menu, which I really like, and it's all fully washed. So they're like a good like OG standard ripper.
I talked to another sales guy from another roasting company, and not naming anyone here, but he was pretty adamant about the fact that they do not source any naturals, or they won't.
Nice.
Yeah, I don't know.
Nice.
I don't know how I feel about that. I'll be honest, I'm not on board. I think naturals are good. I'm not saying they're all good. I lean towards a lot of wash coffees, but I think there's like great naturals. Like I love our fancy Castillo. Like I think, I mean, again, will that be my daily driver? No. Like I'm really liking the Agaro right now. I wish we still had that coffee around. Yeah. Because I still have a few like small little portions of it that I've been brewing a lot.
I just made a AeroPress of it.
Yeah.
In prep for our AeroPress comp in Vancouver.
Yeah.
But yeah, I just had some Agaro on the AeroPress and it was so slamming. It was like so the batch brew that we had. I don't even know why it's so good.
It's so good.
But
I like it a lot.
There is really no great segue out of this, but coffee shops, cafes, I think they play a much bigger role in society, in community, a lot more than we think, a lot more than I think the standard, maybe at face value, you assume. Cafes are good because you can walk in there, it'll give you something to eat sometimes, not all the time, and it'll give you something to drink, a hot cup of coffee. You can go on for your day, which is a very, and it's, I mean, to a certain extent, it's true. That is the bulk of why somebody would enter into a cafe, because they need this product, this food and drink that'll nourish their bodies. But that's a very utility functional focus. But I also don't think it's really everything that they serve in society. I think one thing that really stands out to me is Edwin Martinez, CEO of the Onyx Green Coffee Importers from Guatemala, had a TED Talk. And on the TED Talk, he mentioned how he opened up a coffee bar, which existed, I don't know, it's been maybe like 10 years now. He opened up a coffee bar, literally maybe like, I don't know, the size of literally the other side of this room. Very, very small. Had just enough for bar seating, and then that bar seating was also the register. It was all in one. They only drink black coffee, no cream, no sugar, pour overs, and opened only like 2 times a week on the weekends. And he had on the TED Talk, he mentioned how he just went out to town and asked people, why do you go to cafes? And he said, number one, I think was like internet or something. And they didn't have any internet. And number two, it was like, I don't know, like a place to hang out or something. And then coffee was actually number 4 on the list, which is so crazy to think. That alone has so many like business implications. You know, if you're starting a coffee shop, a brick and mortar for people to go in, that's the kind of data that you really want to think about and take into consideration. If, you know, drinking coffee and eating food is like 4th on the list, then not to say that you should not care about what you're serving. Please serve good coffee, but that means there's just other things that people are coming in for. And so, and that's kind of like what we wanted to dig in today is like, what are some of those things that coffee shops offer to a city that, you know, apart from just coffee?
Yeah, because cafes are often related to as the third place. You know, it's neither your office nor is it your home, or it's like, you know, the local community watering hole where people come and get what they want, what they need, like refresh in that area. But I think even when you think about that concept, like if it's a third place, like people are going to a space instead of just for a product. Right? If there was a vendor that was vending specialty coffee, just hot, you know, brews, like imagine one of those vending machines, but instead it brews, it's like a massive X Bloom. Like imagine someone made an X Bloom into a vending machine and you just come in and just like, would people
they
still
have
do
those
that?
Like gas stations.
No, I'm talking about like next level ones. You know what I mean? I'm talking about X Bloom level of extraction going through. And so there's no excuse that this is bad coffee. Like, would those still sell as much coffee as cafes? And maybe yes or no, we don't know. You know, hypothetically, I would say no, because people aren't, like you said, aren't only going to a cafe for the product. They're going for the space. So it's that third place for them. But with that said, like even when people are opening cafes, like a lot of the conversations I've had with people, like whether I was consulting or with people who opened up a new cafe, usually people are thinking, is this in walking distance near someone's home so someone can wake up and walk, like residential? Or is this in the area of someone's workplace? Those are the two categories. The scary part is when you land in between. It's neither close to your home or close to people's workplaces.
Right.
And that's where a lot of the times, like, oh, there's this beautiful space and nice and windows and, you know, I'm going to put a lot of plants and it's going to be awesome. Right. But it doesn't fit in those categories. A lot of the times those cafes don't survive because of that.
Right.
You know, and with that said, it kind of reminds me of this idea, like if people are going into, like if there's a cafe in your community and you're going to a space, like outside of the product, what are you engaging in that space? Well, of course, baristas, other people in that space. Remind me of, like, you remember when we lived out in Mount Baker Highway, like past that, remember the IGA? And the IGA's motto has always been like, where friends meet friends.
Oh yeah, it's iconic.
It's iconic, right?
Yeah.
And that's kind of how I feel about this idea of a third place, that it does not only form community, it brings community together and creates this ability to be able to foster that kind of energy that you don't always get to do at home. Because at home, a lot of the times you'll just invite your friends, right? People you already know. And at work, you're engaging with people at work and sometimes you don't like them, so you're not going to invite them to your home. There's a lot of the times that disconnect. But in a cafe, it's almost like neutral ground. Does that make sense? So I think when it comes to that's a very broad and general like concept of why cafes are important. And I mean, that is why I believe cafes are generally important in spaces, in communities, is because they do form culture. It's an opportunity to form culture in that area, whether it's through coffee or just hanging out and meeting people, you know?
For sure. I think, yeah, they're a little probably, I would say, I'm just thinking like it's a little different than a restaurant.
Oh, yeah.
Because, you know, a restaurant feels a little more sit down, you're with, you know, your party, you show up, you have food, or, you know, or you're with one other person, or you're just, you know, going and grab food by yourself. Cafes just seem to feel a little more open-ended. Casual, but also kind of a little more, I don't know, maybe this is just my experience, but a little more free and not closed off to, hey, this is where you sit, this is your table, and that's it, you're done. Where, yeah, and it's also probably because of that, and because, of course, I'm biased.
Yeah.
I like coffee and we're in coffee.
Yeah.
But I think it's also like that creates an opportunity to just meet new people. Like a lot of the people I'm thinking about, like the people that I like am friends with, acquainted with, a lot of them have been through the intersection of coffee, which is kind of crazy to think, but that just goes to show, like, you know, coffee shops are this place where you can actually go and meet new people, build connections, make friends. Like, yeah, I remember when I was working at Primer, we had a regular and she came in. I asked her to if I can just take some photos for the Primer Instagram. And then I kind of got to know her a little bit. And then she also happened to be like dating somebody that was also a mutual friend with like Jason and some other people. But I didn't even know that before when meeting her. And it's just like, that was like a clear example of like, oh, interesting. Like you can literally just meet somebody, and usually it's somebody from the community. And it's 100%. Just, there's just so much of that thriving in there that, I don't know, it's just a cool experience. That's, I think, pretty unique to cafes apart from most, maybe not all, but most places.
Yeah. And I think it's for families, it's another great space to be in, right? I think a lot of the times I have a 3-year-old. So a lot of the times it takes a little more planning, a little more challenging to go to a restaurant. And a lot of the times breweries, you can't even like Gruff. I can't take Rain to Gruff. Like, why? It's outdoor patio. It's nice, but it's over 18 plus, right? Like just can't. There's a lot of those limitations to where you can or cannot bring your kids or your family. But cafes, I don't know of a single cafe that's over 18. Like there's no such thing, right?
Yeah.
So almost all cafes are very family friendly. And some cafes I know that go over the top. Like they provide things for your kids to do, right? So it makes it a very easy, accessible space for you to go spend time with, and it feels like neutral ground. But I think outside of that, like we see this shift happened even more after 2020, after COVID, is that cafes now are, because working from home and remote work is so common, cafes are not only turning into this friend meeting space, they are now being used as an office or a remote place to work. So now cafes for the community are providing a workplace, when before it used to be just, you go into the office and maybe you pop in and get a coffee on your break. But now we see more people working in cafes, and then students are also still studying in cafes. So it's providing that element of like you were saying, like internet, like when Edwin polled people, but it's literally how many times do you walk in to cafes, and well, maybe not a lot for you, but I'm thinking of a regular who literally brings their full 3-monitor setup.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
I know. I've seen the guy. I think
they're like crushing work, like literally, So now, I think that's an important part especially for remote workers. I even heard, was it you or someone told me that some jobs are providing a stipend if you work in the cafe. Now, instead of someone was telling me, like, instead of a rent stipend, they're providing you can use this money also for cafes, which is, I think that's also great,
That's incredible.
So it's like a co-working space. So I think that's super important for a community, especially if you live in a neighborhood of a cafe. You pack up your, bag and you walk over to the cafe and get some work done that is not at home, because for some people it's just super hard to focus in their home environment. Nor would I say, like, it's not, especially people who do work in their bedroom. Like, I don't know how healthy that is to make a little crossover between your bedroom and your workplace.
Yeah, it may not
kind
be.
of bad energy, but dude, like, avoid that.
Yeah, I think, I used to be a huge, worker at cafes. I used to spend pretty much all my time working at cafes. There's a few drawbacks, but it's also very, very comfortable. If you're just going in, you have, a treat with you, a cup of coffee, you have internet, pretty much have everything. And it's comfortable, it's nice, away from home, especially if you're a remote worker or like a freelancer, creative. It's just all around like a really solid workspace, which I still not sure why we haven't seen a much heavier overlap of workspace and cafes. What I mean by that is like coworker cafe spaces, spaces that, I don't know, either give you like some kind of, co-work areas, or, you know what I mean? Like, I don't know, something like a membership that, I don't know. I still think that's a cool idea. But, so I don't know why that hasn't been the case, because it's become so popular. Like, it's almost scary. Like, you walk in and it's like so many laptops, and almost everybody, I don't know, maybe they're working or maybe they're just browsing the internet. But and I think on top of that, like, work-wise, what you're getting also is like a really easy, like, hey, you need to have some kind of business meeting with a client, or you need to have, I've seen like whole teams have meetings at coffee shops. So they'll just take their team out to the meeting, and you'll see like, a group of 10, 15 coworkers and employees sitting around for their meeting, which I think is super cool. And and
a lot of cafes accommodate for that. I know at Narrative, the Whatcom Young Professionals group meets every Tuesday morning, and it helps. It is like a team meeting, but it's also more or less like, now it's a place of networking and the ability to make connections. One is meeting friends. Like, you and I have met so many friends, but I'm thinking of, like, even specifically when I met Silas and started working with him and shooting wedding videos with him. Like, I literally met him behind the bar because I was making coffee for him. And then it became like a literal job. He became like I became a second shooter for, I don't know how many weddings we've done already, but it's been a lot. literally because of meeting in the cafe. I mean, one, like the amount of people that just connect with other remote workers like that I've met. Like, you sit behind the bar, you're working behind the bar, and you hear people, meet other people who are not in their same industry,
of course,
and now they're like collaborating on these new ideas, and like you can see the sparks fly, and it's like that's super important for a community to have that space to be, and especially because let's say you live in a community that has that cafe. But then people that are traveling or people that are working remote from out of town and they're stopping by to get some work done. Remember Michelle Lawrence? I don't know if you met her. She would stop by at Makeworth, and she's like the van life, like the super famous van life photographer. She would stop by at Makeworth all the time, and we would chat and catch up, and make those connections over photography and like that kind of style of lifestyle. And then she would meet other people in the cafe. Dylan, I'm thinking of so many people, that you meet.
You meet some pretty famous people in cafes,
so many,
actually.
Like the other day,
just interesting people.
There were so many like quote unquote influencers hanging out, and like Andrew walked in, and I was like, dude, like, what is this, like a sociality or psychologity meetup now? Like, what the heck? Like, it's pretty wild. So I think that's really, really cool. And there is a weird, interesting draw that cafes bring for creatives, So I don't know. I keep going on that. There's the other thing, like we've already talked about friends, but like, the amount of like just people meeting their like partners in cafes, that's huge. And that's like super important for, I'm the one to speak, you know what I mean? Right. Like Maddie was my regular for close to 2 years before we started dating. So it's like stuff like that, like that you literally form these different level of connections in your community. And I think that's like absolutely crucial for the growth and the flourishing of that community. Things change literally in like the amount of, let's say, like, because I'm thinking of narrative, like narrative is in between two different communities, like the Columbia, and Letter Streets. But I've literally seen people come into narrative for the first time and say like, hey, I want to live in Letter Streets because I want to be close to narrative. Like, I love this. Like, and I'm so glad that I moved this. Or people, when they're buying houses, literally choosing to live near something like a cafe for a reason, because that's such a big part of their lifestyle, But yeah, I'll keep going on.
Which brings up, we'll land the plane here shortly, but yeah, cafes give a really great opportunity for people to, for jobs. It's a really big impact, I think, on economies. Also, just giving more interest, more character to your community. Like the fact that people, of course, like if you're buying a house, of course you're going to be thinking about like what's nearby.
Yeah.
Unless you literally don't want anything nearby, but that's also you thinking, I don't want anything exactly. nearby. So it kind of makes sense. But yeah, like it's actually impacting how people like buy houses, where they live, I don't know, where they spend their money. Like it's
totally,
it's a big deal. But also like thinking about like everything you've been saying about, the community aspects. It's like, I think that whole, like, we're building community here, that's how we're going to build a coffee shop, rubs me the wrong way. Cause it's just been said so many times over and over again. Like, oh, we just want to build a community by building a coffee shop. And as much as I would say like, find a better reason to open up a coffee shop, but at the same time, like just talking about this right now, I'm like, oh no, that actually does build somewhat of a community around, a simple beverage, so.
I think the last little caveat I would add to that is like, if you're listening to this and you're like, oh, you're totally hitting all the marks of why I want to start a coffee shop. And, we don't have to dive into that rabbit hole. Right. We've talked about this too much, but to bring a little caveat is the reason cafes are important for communities and the reason cafes play this big role in a neighborhood or a community is because they're unique. Like I think of Cafe Velo here in Bellingham, like literally attracts a unique group of passionate people around bikes.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? That's what creates community, not just throwing up a generic sign of like, hey, we have $2 batch brew and 50-cent donuts.
Yes.
Like that doesn't build community.
Right.
It's
right.
the character of a cafe, the actual space. We talked about that the whole
Right.
episode is that's what brings people together to be able to foster and nurture and kind of create, quote unquote, community.
Yeah. That is a wrap for this episode. Thank you so much for listening to another episode of the Coffee Roaster Warm Sessions podcast. As we always say, remember, reflect what's good.